Joining us for the UrbanCOS session number 2, Arts and Culture in UrbanCOS. I am going to give you a little bit of a welcome, but I want to explain what's on the screen here, and if you happen to catch a glimpse of it, if you can read it from your seat or want to come up later. But this is an infographic from the paper, the Colorado Springs Business Journal, last week. I'm sure it's in support of Arts Month here in the Pikes Peak region, but it talks about the economic impact and value of the arts and culture sector. I'm sure we'll jump into some of these statistics as well, but it was such a great infographic from the paper 2 weeks ago. I thought it supported our discussion this evening. I am so thankful to have such a wonderful panel of experts from all different perspectives, I would say, and probably some shared perspectives as well. But I do want to thank some of our sponsors for this evening. So the College of Letters, Arts, and Science from UCCS is our refreshment sponsor this evening for the rest of the series, as well as Colorado Springs Rising Professionals is sponsoring the student time for the filming of all 3 sessions of this series. So we will have the video links for those at the end of the 90-day series, and so thankful to John for being our student filmmaker on this project. I want to explain that our first session started in the month of September. This whole program came about because a couple of colleagues of mine, we were all discussing about how do we get the folks who are really curious and interested in urban development and the growth of Colorado Springs as an urban community. How do we get them together and start learning about the impacts of urbanism, how to support it, and what are the tools are out there for us to support in the community, to see the kind of community we want to be a part of be developed. So we came up with this 90-day series. The one that we had in September was about urbanism, talked a lot about community development from like an infrastructure standpoint, housing, and how folks used to live in more dense areas, and then the sprawl, and then the resurgence of cities, and how everyone started coming back together in the modern age, I would say. So look for the video link if you missed that one. And tonight we'll be discussing arts and culture in an urban community. And we have some great questions and wonderful experts to give us insight in that. The activity of our last session, we all went around the room and we talked about what's missing, what's working, what's not working, and what's missing in Colorado Springs. So it was a really fun activity. The feedback from that session is going to come back around in session 3, where we'll have that feedback itemized and you can use it to gain some personal insight in the 3rd session. We talk about community development plans. But I did want to say that 2 things that stuck out from the feedback is one thing that we put that was missing, and this is exactly written on the notepad. So what's missing is authentic culture, is what a group wrote on the notepad. So that kind of adds into our discussion this evening, and what is that authentic culture in Colorado Springs, and what are the outlets to support it. And then also, this is kind of a paraphrase, but how can the community come together through placemaking to enhance everything that's working now and bring on new people? So that was kind of a couple of things put together, but it had some feedback from last session about placemaking to enhance everything that's going on now, just to give the panel some insight. To a couple of the folks that are here probably had that insight at the last session. My name's Stephanie Adams. I'm the site director here at UCCS Downtown. And Aaron is our student employee. If you have any questions afterwards, you can certainly ask him as well. After this panel discussion, we're going to go ahead and do a guided tour of some art that we have, public art and gallery spaces that are close to us here. Claire Swimford from the Downtown Partnership will lead that walking tour. And that brings me to our panel. I would love to invite each panelist to stand and introduce themselves and tell us just a little bit about your work in the community. We'll start with Andy.
Okay. You want to see?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andy Vick. I am the Executive Director of the Cultural Office of the Pikes Peak region, also known as COPPER. We are your local arts agency, and so we are the nonprofit organization that works throughout El Paso and Teller counties, and of course the city of Colorado Springs, to help make our arts community vibrant, dynamic, and encourage it to grow and succeed. I'll also say that I am a board member for our state arts agency, Colorado Creative Industries. And I also serve on the United States Urban Arts Federation, which is a council that includes the 60 largest cities in the country. If you don't know, we are now number 39. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Daisy McGowan. I'm the director of the UCCS Galleries of Contemporary Art. And we have had a location in downtown Colorado Springs since 2010. We just opened a new location at the Ent Center for the Arts in 2018. And we had a location since 1980 on the UCCS campus that we moved down the hill because, of course, the Ent Center for the Arts is also on the UCCS campus. The Galleries of Contemporary Art have always been funded by the community, and so you might think about a university academic program, especially a contemporary art program, as being pretty insular, but it's always been really forward-facing. We exist really because of the community, and I talk about how funds were raised to start GOCA, as we call it, and that is remarkable that $400,000 was raised in 1980 to start a contemporary art program. And so we've taken that really and run with it. The Ent Center for the Arts is a really wonderful manifestation of that support of the community. We wouldn't have that without that community support. But what we do in our program is we bring local, regional, national, international artists to our gallery spaces. We fund and support and produce exhibitions and help them in creating new work frequently. We also bring a diversity of speakers. I see some of our speakers from our Chit Chat series, some of our faculty from UCCS, from Colorado College, and as we like to say, mind the local genius in this community. So we present a whole range of programs. We've had a lot of growth in the biggest attendance year before we opened the Ent Center for the Arts was about 25,000 with all of our programs. And in 2018, we had over 150,000 folks visit the Ent Center for the Arts Public Sculpture Program, which I hope you've gotten a chance to see. And then not all of them got into the gallery, but a good number of those. So we've had a wonderful growth, but we're still very proud to have our downtown presence. And we now split the space with our Visual and Performing Arts Department, and that's who we'll see later tonight. Catherine Guinness is the art history faculty, and she'll talk about the show she curated that's currently in the space. And we involve our students in everything we do, and they're a big part of what we do. They get to work with the artists and internships and student employees as well, and it's a wonderful learning experience. So I think I'll turn it over to Claire.
Hello, everybody. I am Claire Swinford. I am the Director of Urban Engagement for Downtown Partnership of Colorado Springs. Now, it's not necessarily important that you know what Downtown Partnership is. It is important to us that you share our perception of downtown as really a jewel for our community. This historic neighborhood has always been the beating heart of Colorado Springs, and our organization exists to ensure that it remains economically vibrant, culturally active, and that people have a conduit to be civically engaged here. So we do these through a number of different channels, a lot of special stuff about tax districts that I'm not going to go into because it's boring. But we do have a nonprofit arm, and we have about 8 different public benefit programs, including one of our city's oldest public art exhibits, Art on the Streets, is 21 years old. And another one of those public benefit programs is we are the state certified creative district of downtown Colorado Springs. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get going here. But I look forward to sharing with you all why urbanism and the arts intersect, because that's what I live and breathe every day, and it's a fascinating topic.
Hi, I'm Kevin Yoshida. I plug into the urbanism and creative economy discussion at several levels. I'll just go through those quickly, maybe from the top down. One is at the state level. Claire mentioned your Colorado Springs Downtown is one of the 23 certified creative districts. So I come from another one, which is in Lakewood, Colorado. Everybody know Casa Bonita? So, that arts district in my studio is just a block from there, but that's one of the other 23 districts. So one of the nonprofits that I co-founded was called the Creativity Lab of Colorado. So we work with the governor's office and the Creative District program to provide resources for all the other creative districts throughout the state. I mentioned, I'm also active as a volunteer board member for 40 West Arts, so bring that perspective of community engagement, involvement into it. And I'm also an architect, practiced in Denver my whole life, and always been in the center of this conversation about what is responsible growth and how to creators play a role in it.
Wonderful. Thank you all again so much for your time. So we're just going to jump into some of the pre-planned questions, and then as we get to the end, then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience. So first question, Claire mentioned it specifically, but can you explain to all of us what is a creative district and why would a community want to be one?
Absolutely. Kevin, you want to
Sure.
field that one?
So the Creative District program is really unique. It was pioneered in this state in 2011, came out of the governor's office Office of Economic Development and International Trade. Sorry, I had to picture the acronym before I could get it out. So you can, given the wordy title there, you can imagine it connects with a much bigger conversation about an economic development tool for towns of many sizes. So Main Street districts are good candidates. We're currently working with a lot of rural towns, agriculture and mining towns who have great DNA or authenticity in their main streets and buildings and infrastructure, but are looking for a new tool to galvanize around. So at the core of it, it was looking to the untapped potential in my mind of the creative community to be a stronger voice in broader economic development.
Yeah.
Anything to add there?
I guess I would add that creative districts are not unique to Colorado. They are all over the country, and in some cases they are managed at a state level, and the state pulls them all together, and there's value in being part of this cohort, and the state can brand and use directional signs off the highway to get people to creative districts. And they are really, at their core, they are in most cases, a walkable, contiguous area where there's a high density of artists, creative endeavors, creative venues, attractions, such that you can leverage all those for economic benefit.
Right. I'd say, and whether you're talking about an urban arts district like Rhino, or whether you're talking about a small town like Ridgeway, both of which are certified by the state of Colorado as creative districts, in both cases, the thing that those areas have in common, and have in common with downtown Colorado Springs as well, is that they contribute a significant amount of jobs, revenue, and grant dollars to the local economy via creative businesses and nonprofits. And here in the downtown Colorado Springs Creative District, we're at 6 times the national average for those things. Our Creative Vitality Index is something like a 6.25. What does that mean in terms of impact on our lives as residents? That means that just in this little 1 square mile at the center of our 198 square mile municipality, we are looking at over 1,400 jobs, $65.3 million each year in industry earnings, and $12.2 million each year in nonprofit revenues going into our local economy just from this 1 square mile. That's really something worth celebrating, and that's something that we're really proud to have recognized by the state, because they're coming back to us and giving resources to creative entrepreneurs, whether that's grants or networking opportunities to develop their professional callings. We're getting that kind of support from the State Office of Economic Development because the governor recognized that in Colorado, the creative industries are an important part of our future as a state.
Just to add to those stats quickly, Margaret Hunt, the executive director of CCI, I was with her in Ignacio, and one of the new stats that came out for Colorado is a footprint of $13.7 billion, I think, and over 100,000 jobs that are associated. Yeah, so it's wonderful to hear your local stats as well. It's a big footprint, and that's really an important time right now, is to start trumpeting and talking about how galvanizing this conversation can be.
And that's relevant whether or not you are part of the arts or not. I mean, I'm assuming since you guys went to something with art in the title, you all kind of feel good about the role that our arts play in the community. But if you're talking to someone who maybe doesn't share that affiliation, one of the stats I like to quote to them is the fact that our little downtown creative district contributes about 10 times its economic weight in sales tax revenue to our municipality. Compare this 1 square mile with any other 1 square mile in the city, 10 times more sales tax is going into city coffers. So you talk about the arts, and you, as an economic driver for this area, you're talking about what's paving our roads, paying our firefighters, and watering our parks. It is a huge quality of life indicator.
That's a great point and so well said. Can you tell us a little bit, anyone want to add in, what are some creative industries? What are some businesses that are included in creative industry?
I made a list.
I know. I saw your list, and it's.
Do you want to give us the 10,000-foot view?
Sure. I'll go high and then bring it down, or maybe vice versa. I mean, it's from my personal standpoint, it's always as broad as possible. I mean, I think almost any endeavor involves some creativity. I like to use chefs as an example. I definitely consider that. Most of us would, that profession, that individual or team as a creative. When you talk about some of the numbers that Claire and I were talking about, maybe the restaurant is categorized in a different bucket, and justifiably so. But from a creative district standpoint, I think the footprint you talks about brings those lines, brings that all back into alignment. They're partners. They're contributing to the fabric of cultural activities that can happen, keeping people here, keeping people spending, keeping people smiling, that it's all integrated. So I'll let others talk about the litany of definitions, but that's how I like to think about it, both culturally in terms of inclusivity, and then broadly in terms of local economic impact, because some of the stats do distill and pull some of the other buckets out of what I would consider creative, again, like restaurateurs, the computer industry, fabrication. In our district, from my point of view, those are definitely all included in the footprint.
Yeah, if it involves your hands and your brain, and the output is something that's benefiting the community, I think it's absolutely a creative industry. Andy, did you?
I would agree. We like to define it as broadly as we can get away with, and invite everyone who's doing anything creative to feel like they are part of this creative community. So we also define it as far as we can get with it.
Go ahead, Daisy.
Well, and when you major in visual art, performing arts at UCCS, oftentimes the family members are concerned, what is the future for my child, and will they get a job as an artist? There are many, many more options with creative training than just being an artist, which is a great profession. But there's just, I saw your list, it's impressive, and it's it's really sort of limitless. You start thinking about it, and at GOCA we try to celebrate those broad categories by featuring folks who, we've had events downtown called Brilliant for many years, where we brought together as many of those categories as we could in one night. But I think that broad approach benefits all of us to think as broadly as possible.
Well, that's one of my favorite things about your chit-chat events, Daisy, and about flipping through the Peak Radar pages that Andy's organization put out. You see everything from cocktail mixologists to people who study the weather to people who whittle as a hobby. And that's, knives, not embarrassing things that puppies do on the rug. But you see this huge swath that covers so many ways of being and so many sources of creativity in our community. I mean, we've referenced the list. The state identifies 6 subgroups of the creative economy, and that is design, which itself is really darn broad, film and media, literary and publishing, performing arts, visual arts and crafts, and heritage, things like museums and cultural preservation organizations. Here in the downtown creative district, absolutely counting craft breweries, craft distillers, DIYers, tattoo artists, chocolatiers, auto body salons, house concert presenters, and even churches with robust art programs. We count all of those. They all have a role to play in the vitality of this district and, by extension, this city.
Wonderful. Okay, the next question I think is going to be helpful as we go through the rest of the questions. But does someone want to take a stab at defining arts and culture separately, and why we use them synonymously all the time.
Well, I think probably for the reason, that list sort of demonstrated is that when we think of arts, we tend to sort of narrow to sort of classic disciplines. Culture, of course, is evidence of human activity. When we talk about arts and culture, though, I think we are sort of looking at it through the lens of art, but again, taking that broad approach and embracing versus saying, oh, this is this silo and sort of a classical training in an art school. You might consider only, painting, drawing, sculpture, dance. Let's break those silos down and really open it up. And so, when people say arts and culture, I think that's where they're going.
Like culture as expression, so it kind of adds that kind of broad piece.
Yeah. And culture is, really like when we look back on history, that's the evidence of human activity. But what do we really see? We look at economy, we look at, but we often look at the arts as an indicator of what a culture was doing. So that thinking about it from that perspective, think about evidence of human activity and specifically expressive. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, what type of community infrastructure is needed to support local artists, creative industries, and those cultural opportunities? So community infrastructure being housing, supply chain access, living expenses, things that you would need to stay in a creative district.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really top of mind right now as this community grows and the cost of living increases is how do we continue to find affordable housing for our creatives, and frankly not just for creatives but for anyone in the community. And so I think that's in many successful and growing communities, that's one of the items that's really top of mind is how do we make sure we don't displace our artist populations who are often responsible for helping a community to rise, and then the community rises, the cost of living goes up, and then those artists can no longer live in that community because they can't afford to do that in some instances. So how do we ensure that that is not going to happen, which is difficult, or how do we ensure to the best that we're able that we minimize the impact of that? And I know that the Downtown Partnership is working on affordable housing, and
absolutely,
Claire should probably chime in on that.
I'll add that it's not just affordable housing, it's also affordable office and retail space for those creative industries as well. Because frequently they're sort of the canaries in the coal mine of what some people might term as gentrification. The artists and the creatives come in and make the neighborhood cool. That attracts additional investment, and all of a sudden those same people who made that place so vibrant in the first place no longer can afford to live or work there. And we don't want to see that happen in this community. So there's a lot of different tools that can be put towards the prevention of that outcome. That's a really interesting topic being sort of explored around the state right now. The tool that my organization is currently using is a nonprofit out of Minnesota called ArtSpace. They exist to develop affordable housing for artists and creatives, and like all of us, they're defining that really broadly. And we have been working with them to conduct feasibility studies and start to work on the federal grants process that would allow us to build a residential community for artists that also might have gallery and fabrication space and that remains affordable according to social services standards in perpetuity. So people who live there are never going to be priced out. That is a long, long process. And especially when a community is feeling the kind of development and urgency that Colorado Springs is right now, people are saying, why don't you have this already? Why wasn't this here yesterday? And that's an important part of the work we're doing in the interim, is to just communicate with people, make sure we're listening to those needs, and in as much as possible, try to connect them with other resources in the community so that they can stick it out a little bit longer, help to develop their business to the point where hopefully one day they're not going to need to have affordable housing. They can afford market rate. But that's something that we've been paying attention to for a couple years now, and have been really trying to pay attention to all the options on the table to address for our community.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just to add to a couple layers of that, ArtSpace is a great partner. They're working throughout the state in rural communities, urban communities. I was lucky enough to work with them on their first project up in Loveland. And one of the interesting insights some of their team had was just the policy component and the funding component, and how many, that's how many years sometimes that has to get ahead of the game to be a tool in place when communities start to engage it. So it was a reminder to me on all the different hats that we wear in this conversation, that policy and elected officials play a role in that, and start early those conversations before the need becomes too imperative. And beyond the as a creative myself and working with other creatives and the affordability question, I think you're right. It comes in all flavors. I think industrial parks and some of the dirty spaces and maker spaces that they need too is just as subject to the volatility as the more overt and public ones that you see in the headlines, like housing, as well as the kind of business coaching and the other day-to-day one-on-one support to break that cycle of the need for artists to always be subsidized. While I think it's important, I think the other side of the equation is also important to acknowledge breaking that cycle and empowering our creatives like we would any other entrepreneurial venture.
Right.
I think there's some other things too that are very much needed in this community. I hear all the time how we wish we had more performing arts spaces, small spaces where small theater groups can get together and perform. Music venues that aren't 2,000 seats, so that you can have more music happening. You need a lot of venues, and I think we have certainly some venues, but I think we could certainly in this community use more venues, smaller, more intimate venues where small groups and individual artists can do their thing in a public setting. So I think we need that. I think we're also, in terms of infrastructure, opportunities for funding for artists. There really are not that many avenues for individual artists to receive funding to do their work. There are other communities where there are substantive grants that are available to visual artists, for example, to go out and get a $20,000 grant and be able to pursue their art form with a little more freedom financially because of those granting opportunities. So I think there's a need for more of that in this community. We have, through our universities, some opportunities where you're bringing in nationally and internationally known artists who can do residencies and then work with our local artists. I think we could be doing so much more of that, so that the experts at the national and international level can trickle down their experience to our local artists, which in turn allows them to elevate their skills and become more talented and less dependent on affordable housing as they grow. So there are a lot of different pieces beyond just housing, for example, or business skills that make a community appealing to artists and that help artists to succeed. And some of that we do well, and some of that we have a lot of room for improvement, I think.
I would argue, too, that some of the benefit of subsidizing housing, say, for artists, is that there's a real value in having them in your community working. You just have to look north to Denver, to Rhino, which has this Rhino that says art, but the actual number of galleries that can exist there, or artist studios, is almost next to zero now. Helicon Gallery just closed. That was a space that was actually owned by the artists, and they couldn't afford the taxes because that area's gone up. It was $6,000 a month for taxes. And so, not all artists are going to make some stratospheric, growth in their income. I think it's also okay to say that there's a real value in having artists living and working in your community. And maybe they are showing internationally and nationally, and they're coming back here. Like, we have some artists here that are doing that. Maybe they're showing regionally or locally. But having that creative sector, and I know we've talked about defining it so broadly, but I am talking really about artists, I think that that's worth supporting as well.
Absolutely. And that, just to bring it back to all of you who took the time out of your evenings to be here tonight, we can talk. Kevin said something very interesting. He mentioned elected officials, and we can and do talk to our elected officials locally frequently till we're blue in the face, trying to help them see the truths about our creative community that we see every day.
Thank you.
But if our voice gets heated sometimes, you, the voting public, are the voice they are most likely to heed. And if our elected officials are consistently hearing from constituents that they want and need a community that is a supportive ecosystem for artists and creatives, if they're hearing consistently that this is something you value about Colorado Springs the way it is now and you would like to see more of it in the future, that is immensely valuable. And over time, that's how we're going to see all these great things that we're saying, oh yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful to have affordable housing, more performing arts venues, all of these great things. That in part happens with local government support, and they need to be able to hear that that is something that they should be placing a priority on.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you all for those responses. Next question is, how do you think density and urban growth impact the local arts community and cultural opportunities?
I guess I see it as sort of a double-edged sword, right? The more people that are here, the more people can go out and support our creatives, whether that's buying a painting or buying a ticket to a performance. So you've got to have enough people attending events and acquiring artwork if you want to keep those artists consuming and performing and producing rather. And on the flip side though, if you have too much, cost of living goes up, competition goes up. But I would argue that more is better, right? Mm-hmm. When you have more creatives in a space, they're having all these wonderful collisions and interactions and new things are being produced and created, and that's where the beauty is. That's where the excitement is. So I think as we grow as a city and more creatives come here and we create a space that's welcoming for them, I think that only elevates the arts community, and I'm all for that more happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that artists thrive in proximity to one another, and I can speak to this from an economic development standpoint and from the standpoint of an artist who has a studio practice. I get more done when I know that the painter down the hall is going to walk in and ask me what I'm doing and ask to see what I've been working on. And when I have that kind of creative support and accountability, amazing things happen. And that's true for a community just as it is for an individual artist. And that's true whether you're talking about an urban area like downtown Colorado Springs or a tiny rural community like UrbanCOS, Colorado. There has to be a hub where people know they can go to participate in arts and culture. And like Andy said, the more dense that hub is, the more support for the cultural institutions and the creative entrepreneurs residing there. I think what I'd really like to pull out is the link that has to the way that we grow, smart growth, human-scaled design, the idea that streets that are walkable, housing and shopping that are in close proximity to one another, and accessible public spaces. Those kinds of things are absolutely critical to the economy, the health, and the environment of our region, and it's no coincidence that those are also the things that allow arts and culture to thrive as well. So that's why it's important to put the lens here that Stephanie did, where we are embracing concepts like smart growth and new urbanism to ensure that our city develops in ways that is going to make life better for citizens, not just private interests, and understanding the role that arts and culture have in making those positive outcomes happen.
Wonderful. So then that leads straight into the next question a little bit. Claire, what role does public space, you talked a little bit about human scale design and walkability, but what role does public space and the concept of placemaking play in supporting local arts and culture?
Oh man, this is my favorite thing to talk about. Because if you've had an interaction with a piece of public art in downtown Colorado Springs, chances are that my department might have had something to do with it. If you've ever gone into a park to look a little closer at a sculpture or a fountain, if you've ever walked one more block because there was a mural down there that you kind of caught your eye and you wanted to see, then you have benefited from the role that the creative industries play in placemaking in an urban environment. And we've been using that as a tool to make this neighborhood better for 21 years. Does anybody remember what Colorado Springs was like 21 years ago? Anybody remember seeing tumbleweeds rolling down Tejon Street?
The same thing.
You could always find parking because nobody wanted to be there. And that was the environment into which the founders of my program stepped. They were both female entrepreneurs who had street-level businesses in downtown Colorado Springs. And they were tormented by this lack of vitality in our downtown. And they identified public art as one of the first tools they wanted to use to try to solve it. And you can imagine what the response was from the rest of the business community. They were like, well, this seems frivolous. I don't think this is going to work. But they had one block of business owners who said yes. That first year in 1999, they put up something like 20 sculptures on that one block. And a really funny thing happened. People started coming down because they'd read about the sculptures in the newspaper. They started talking to one another about the sculptures. Those conversations turned into, well, let's grab lunch or maybe go see a movie. And all of a sudden, the businesses on that block are back in the black. And all of a sudden, you have the rest of the community downtown beating down the doors of those two female entrepreneurs saying, hey, when are you going to come put sculpture in our block? We like what it does. And 20 years ago, there's a lot of factors that have played into the revitalization of our historic downtown, but that is one that is consistently pointed back to the fact that we invest in public space, we use public art to make it more friendly, to incentivize people to explore it more, and to have conversations with one another.
That's great. You've done an amazing job here, just as a consumer, and remembering the quiet days when I'd come down to do business, and then the play and discovery and kinetic motion, all of it that's been introduced. It's, I mean, the corollary on both these questions I like to think from as an architect is, we decorate our hallways and we decorate our rooms, and just like you said, our streets and our plazas should be no different. They should reflect the authenticity of the family or the community and invite others to engage and create memories. So I think that's how it all stitches together. They are the artifacts and the things that you need to invite people, but you're inviting them into a bigger cultural identity discussion. You've done an amazing job here in downtown Colorado Springs.
Well, and I love how public art really helps you see the world in different ways. So the first time when we installed Sean O'Malley's birds in the alleyway, I was on the jury that year, and I was so excited that we got the go-ahead to do that, because it sort of just transformed. Oh, we could do this in this space, and this space. And then you might look at these spaces and think about the potential. It's really remarkable what's been done, especially when you consider that it's done with just private support. It's
Thank you for pointing that
really
out.
Remarkable.
No tax dollars.
Think about how much more could happen if there was public funding. I've talked about that for a long time too, but really it's a testament to folks in the city from those early days to now. And Claire, you work so hard, and Andy as well, to really bring vitality to downtown. Up at the Ent Center for the Arts, we have this beautiful building. The architects have a lot to be proud of. But frankly, people thought it was a very fancy bank. And then we got the chance to bring 3-star Kemp sculptures there and to rotate artworks out. And so that when you drive up to the building, this is about art. And that, obviously, once you have an experience in the space, it's memorable. You'll never forget that building is all about art. But, it really does help. And I feel like you've done that here in downtown, which is really such the heart of this city. So, bravo.
Well, and I love the way that you're talking about signaling the use of a place through the art that you put out around it. And Kevin, I loved your metaphor about it's just like how you would decorate your house is intended to say something about who you are. Our public art says something about who we are. And in my role, I'm hearing from out-of-towners a lot who are like, what is this place? You have vinyl parrots flying out of alleyways, you have big silver deer with tree branch antlers, you have all of this wonderful stuff out in your public space. I've never seen anything like this. what is Colorado Springs? What do you have going on here? How can I be part of it too? We're making a value statement about who we are as a community and what we aspire to with our public art. Public is in the name. It's ADA accessible. It's open 365 days a year. You can appreciate it whether or not you speak English, whether or not you have money in your bank account, whether or not you have your hearing or your sight. This exhibit is there to be appreciated by you and to serve as a value statement for yourself and your neighbors. And that is hugely important to have in our public space, because it makes us feel cared for as a community, and it enables us to demonstrate what we value to others as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We talked a little bit about that last time. Dr. Harner's lecture talked about how downtown used to be about centrality, and we'd have a hardware store and a grocery store, and now downtown is about lifestyle choices and entertainment and purposeful design. So I think that's a big transition piece, and you touched on that as well. We mentioned creative ecosystem a couple of times. So the next question is, how is diversity and inclusion addressed in our current creative ecosystem?
I think it could be addressed in a lot stronger way, and I think one of the things that our office is very proud of is that when we just had our Business at Arts lunch, we just had our Artini event. When we present and showcase talent in this community, we make sure that it is presented in as diverse a way as we possibly can to represent as many different faces as we can. And we are challenged in that we are a predominantly Anglo-white community, but we have very talented artists of many different colors, and they need to be brought forward, and their talents need to be shared. And I think that's one of the things we're very proud of at the Cultural Office, is as we do more and more of that, I think our artists of different colors feel more welcome, more invited, and we'll be able to see more of the amazing work that they do. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that specific space in this community, but I think those of us who value the arts understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a key part of bringing an arts community forward, and certainly our office is working very hard to do that all the time.
Yeah, it's something as curators that we talk about, and it's very top of mind. At the Ent Center for the Arts, we have a professional theater company. Theater Works has been in the community for over 4 decades. We have a presenting series, the Artist Series, and then of course we have the Galleries of Contemporary Art. We also have our Visual and Performing Arts Department in the space, and they're presenting a number of programs as well. Boy, there's a lot. I think we're doing a really great job with our programs, but what's really challenging is thinking about diversity in a lot of different ways. So let's move beyond what you might just come to mind at first and think about economic diversity. Like, how are we bringing folks into that building? Is it off-putting to people? Are many of our students, 40% are first generation? I bring students in there, and many have never been to a museum. Whether or not they're first generation or not, that's just not on their background. And so we're constantly working on overcoming barriers of entry, as we call them, to help folks to feel invited in. Some of that's ticket pricing for us, and that's a real challenge. The gallery, SCOCA, is always free, but some of the other programs, for our students, we're able to offer free tickets, but for the community, maybe we have more challenges with that. So the way we're doing that is we're specifically working on, we've been working very hard to reach out to groups, to invite them in, specifically for maybe a certain community group or civic group might have connections to folks that would connect with the art that we're doing, that they maybe wouldn't know about it unless we do that outreach. So outreach is huge, and we need to do more of it, and that's where we're hoping to bring more attention going forward as well. Because the art that we're presenting in this community, I think, is at this level that is very high, a lot of it, and I think it's really about how do you help folks to feel welcomed in, and like they get to see themselves there in the art, but also that there's a place for them there in the audience. Sure.
I mean, I would say the best 3 levers that Art on the Streets specifically has to impact diversity, equity, inclusion. The first lever really does address the socioeconomic diversity component that Daisy mentioned. The fact is, we're not just putting murals and sculptures on blocks that are already pretty and doing well and clearly have people invested in their upkeep. We're frequently putting art into areas that could use a little help because we know that it has a role to play in making that space safer to use. And of course, in downtown, that's a huge issue because we know that we have a proportionately pretty large community of unhoused individuals who are using this neighborhood as their home. And safety is a huge issue in that community. How can we impact the public spaces used by those individuals in a way that makes them safer? And sometimes it's as simple as making sure that there are lights on, and sometimes it's a little more complicated, such as putting a sculpture or a mural out as a way of signaling more diverse use of that space by a wider swath of the community, because the more people you have using a space, the safer it is for all. One specific example is we have a long-standing partnership with Mountain Metropolitan Transit to put art in the downtown transit center. There is no Art on the Streets exhibit that goes up without at least one piece in the bus station there to be enjoyed by whatever individuals happen to be passing through. Whether or not you have time in your day as a bus user to opt into a specifically cultural experience, whether or not you have the extra funding to enable you to be a patron of the arts and for events that cost money, whether or not you would even consider that an important thing for yourself or your family. It's there for you to enjoy and interact with. And I will say in passing that the bus station is where we get the most comments from people.
Oh, really?
As we're putting up or taking down the art. We'll have, the guy with the T-shirt that says, "I'm a veteran, don't talk to me." And he comes up and talks to us because he wants to tell us that he likes the piece and he thinks it's effective and that he's enjoyed looking at it. You'll have the guy who's on his way down to Springs Rescue Mission be like, "So that thing, I want to tell you exactly what I think about this piece that you've had here, and I'm really sad you're taking it away." We prioritize putting art in that location that has something to say and says it in a way that's interactive, because we know that that is something that really catches people's attention, and it's a very humanizing thing as well. This isn't just a place where you're sort of waiting to be shunted from point A to point B. The people who are in charge of this space care enough about your experience in it to be putting up art there for you to enjoy. This year specifically, the piece that's in the Downtown Transit Center is a mural by a Korean-American artist from Texas who said, "I want you to put my piece in a place that needs an oasis, a place that would otherwise not feel good to be in." And so we ended up putting up this lovely mural that kind of reminds us of Monet's water lilies, except all of the creatures and plants are origami. We ended up putting up this mural in the departure lounge of the Downtown Transit Center. And just because I know Stephanie's got more questions, I'll just say we use other levers as well to prioritize diversity and inclusion in our exhibit. Who's on the jury, of course, is a huge one, because artists of non-Anglo descent don't just want to be contributors, they want to be decision makers. And that's an important part of leveling the playing field. So including jurors of differing ethnic backgrounds, different life experiences on our panel has been a wonderful way to make our exhibit more relatable for a wider swath of audiences. And just making sure that it remains accessible and working with our local independent center to ensure that the exhibit truly can be accessed by people of a wide range of abilities and physical or mental differences has been really important for us, and we've done a lot of programs specifically around that.
Yeah, I wouldn't add a whole lot to that other than I feel like it is the biggest gap right now for me personally, and then more broadly as a toolkit. I'm learning as much as I can from anybody I can about the topic. Was lucky enough to work with some of the up-and-coming districts in Washington who are working on this question on a First Nation level. Super interesting conversation. We, much like Claire in 40 West, tried to meet people where they're at. So we did something called the Art Line, which is a 4.5 mile arts experience, which links our parks, our public parks, together through art activation of sidewalks, bike paths. We have light rail running through our district. So just trying to create art opportunities where the neighborhood is already, and not bring them to us or the things that we thought we wanted. We are trying to figure out how to reach out a hand and meet everybody where they're at, and it's a complicated question, and it takes a while to get there.
It's a literal line. I was driving along it yesterday, this green line. I thought, this is so cool. I really
Thankfully it was warm, so it wasn't covered by snow. But
it was warm, yeah.
Okay, so this is going to be the last question of mine, and then we'll have a few minutes to ask questions from the audience. But what exciting things do you see happening in the arts and cultural community as we continue to grow as a city?
Well, for me, one of the big things is that museum that's going up a couple blocks away from here. Yeah. It's a museum about sports, but it's a museum. It's a cultural institution that is going to be another anchor in our downtown that's going to pull visitors, local and from out of the area, to our downtown to enjoy all the other things we have. And I think it's going to be a huge addition to our downtown and to our community.
It's such an exciting thing to see that opening up. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Oh, yeah. So what exciting things do you see happening in the arts and cultural community as the city continues to grow?
Yeah, I got so excited by the Olympic Museum. My brain. I think right now it's been the last couple of years have felt like this big leap up, but then with the Olympic Museum coming online, with hopefully art spaces, coming through. I don't know, I think the next 5 years are going to be tremendous. We're going to see a lot of change. Downtown, we're already seeing a lot of density building, and so it's been exciting. I have worked in this community in the arts for 22 years, and it has changed so much during that time. But, just speaking from the point of view of someone who fundraises for everything we do in this community, it's really exciting to have such an influx of population. There's so many folks coming in who really see the value of supporting the arts, and so I'm hopeful always that there will be some public funding that will come forth, and we actually would not benefit from that because we're part of a university, but I think it would really benefit the community and the work that's happening of these folks, on either side me. They really deserve that support, but I think it would just also then bring us up a whole nother level, and the economic data has been out here. You do such a great job of sharing that, but I think really we're going to see a big leap up, and so I hope that folks will step up and support it with some ballot measures, and then also continue to contribute and support as this community does. And it's really quite remarkable how much this community, individuals in this community, support the arts.
Well, and if we've gone this far just with private funding, with grants and donations, how much further could we go with public support as well? And this summer, we actually, as a community, took an important step forward with that. The city allocated funding to do a public art master plan. We've never had one of those before. They got input from nearly 900 community members, 96% of whom said the arts are important to them and their families. That is a huge mandate. But it's not going to take us all the way there. So I do think it's incredibly important to stay civically engaged as that information starts to percolate through the consciousness of city government. But in the meantime, as we're having all of these important high-level projects come online, as we're seeing huge growth in our community, I just want to reference the program that convinced me I wanted to stay here, because like Daisy, I've lived here for over 20 years, and I was convinced I wanted to leave as soon as I could. I wanted to hightail it for the West Coast and never look back. And what convinced me to stay was our local artists, our visual artists, our performing artists. The more I got to know this community and the people who are making work for the entertainment and enjoyment and edification of their fellow citizens, the more I felt like this community was home. And I would encourage you, if you've never experienced First Friday downtown, that was what got me hooked, was going out on the first Friday of the month, in the evening and going around to all of the venues that present new art shows or performances or just weird fun stuff on that specific night of the month year round. We saw 30% growth for that program last year, which says that other people are having that same experience I did and finding enjoyment and finding a reason to stay here because of our local arts and culture scene. So to me, that's hugely exciting that a program that's been going on since the 90s is now seeing record growth because it's still got something to offer, and that something is more important to our community than ever.
I'd love to. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You didn't know if you want to comment on the local. Go ahead.
No, I would just. You're from the next, as a peer's perspective. You're up to amazing things, and everything Claire said. You know, set a vision, set an intention. You're on a journey, and celebrate on the way, and people will keep coming. So it's.
And I think it's important to know on that point that we have a cultural plan that was done back in 2010 and will be expiring in 2020. And so the Cultural Office, working together with the B. Vredenberg Foundation, is about to embark on our next 10-year cultural plan that'll guide this creative community from 2020 through 2030. So look for that to launch after the new year, and then the plan itself will be released in Arts Month, October next year. But there will be lots of opportunity in the first 2 quarters of 2020 for you all as community members to be part of this larger cultural planning process that will in many ways define the direction of our creative community for the next 10 years.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you, Andy. So that's going to cut off moderator questions, but we have just a few minutes if the audience has anything specific, but please speak loudly because our microphone is just right up here on the table. So, David.
While we're talking about the future, and I'll probably direct this to you, Andy and Claire, the Parks Department is beginning to plan and think about where our 3 historical parks in downtown might go. And, you know, I think some of the pictures they've shown to get our creative juices going. I have 2 questions, and this is, as you look, and this is more your own personal, if you were looking at something creative to go on in our 3 historical parks, you know, because I think when we travel, we see so many wonderful things. What are some of the things we might begin dreaming about? And then the second part of that, knowing our history as an anti-tax community, the city doesn't have the infrastructure to program it. And again, I think we go to these cities and find parks have got something going on every night. Who do you see moving in and coordinating the programming in the parks for the arts and culture?
So, well, I guess first, just for clarity for the audience,
Right.
the parks that are David's referring to are Acacia, Antlers, and Alamo, which is where the Pioneers Museum is. And so there's a study going on now about those 3 parks and how do we activate/reactivate them in ways that are going to be beneficial to the community. I mean, to me, one of the obvious things is that band shell in Acacia Park that seems to be woefully underused. How do we upgrade that facility and make it a space where artists and arts organizations can, throughout the year, weather permitting, really use that space, that venue in a more productive way to reactivate and reanimate, even beyond what Downtown Partnership's already done with things like the ice skating rink, etc. But that park has a lot of potential, I think, to be even more than it already is. You know, the Antlers Park behind the Antlers Hotel, that's a real question. What's going on there? I think some of the things that the Pikes Peak Community College is doing, they've really renovated for a lot of art purposes their existing campus downtown, and then they have plans in the next month or 2 to open across the street. There's going to be more of a black box theater kind of space there. So that may really be a catalyst for moving more activity into the Antlers Park area. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of potential there as well.
Come on, Andy, and can't we just knock down the Antlers and rebuild it the way it was initially, where it faced the park? That might help a little bit.
Yeah, that's pretty major. I don't know.
No, but I will say it was just a couple years ago that we had an international expert in parks activation come to visit this community. Gil Peñalosa, founder of the 8 to 80 Cities movement. He was the parks director for the city of Bogota, Colombia at a time where they had I think they were the world's murder capital, not necessarily something you put on the tourism brochures. And his solution was to get people back into the parks through just weekly programming, things designed to help people just socialize with their community. And he came to our community. He looked at our downtown parks and he said, God has done 90% of the work. You have failed to do the last 10%. And he specifically said, if you could only keep that skating rink open year-round, and if you just added like a restaurant or a beer garden or something, that would really make all the difference. Now, of course, thanks to General Palmer at this point in time, we can't have that beer garden. But we saw the success with just a little experiment of that kind with putting Story Coffee in the park. Those business owners have moved mountains to make that park a more positive place. Imagine, and I think by the same token, Food Truck Tuesday down here in Alamo Park has done a lot toward making that park a happier, more active place. And I do think that citizen input is going to be needed for this Parks Master Plan, and specifically for what should happen to Antlers Park to make it function as well as it possibly can. I think you're right to point out the cultural assets surrounding that park. The fact is, it's a dark space, and it's a space that doesn't feel safe. And what it takes to change that is going to be not one thing, but a lot of things, and a commitment by the community to going in and using that space, because what ultimately changes a park is people in it.
Yeah, I'm working on a year of socially engaged art for the university public sculpture program. I want to really blow up the idea of what you think of as public sculpture, to expand it out, I should say. And that takes a lot of work to coordinate happenings and activations, specifically bringing in sculpture that has a social component to it. And that can be so many different levels, but it does take a lot of resources. It takes a lot of time. And so, I don't know, maybe the universities are a place to look at in Colorado College to see if there are programs that could come in there, and really if there was some support for that. I know everybody's stretched pretty thin, and so, I really think, frankly, what we need for that is more funding. But I hear your point about, in the next 5 years, are we going to have that? So I think hopefully that, we can get some people behind activating those spaces, because like you said, the more active a space is, the safer it really is. It feels safer, and perceptions have to change. I know you deal with that with downtown. You've done such a terrific job of helping people feel safer here just by having art in these spaces, and but we need more.
Okay, so we're supposed to go on our guided walking tour as well. So I want to be respectful of our panel's time and all of your time as well. So if you do have a question from the audience, let's maybe hold it for our walk over to the art. I just want to really thank our panel. We could all give them a round of applause.